Fugitives. Chapter 2, First Part. As Layla hit the brakes, a gorgeous figure in black greeted her. "Very nicely done," Dee said in his serene tone. Weathering a sensation that was neither fever nor chills racing down her spine, Layla replied with bald-faced hostility. "You still kicking around? If you don't make tracks and fast, I'm gonna have to run you down and kill you," she warned. Without acknowledging her threat, Dee said softly, "Someone should take a look at your wound." "And you'd best mind your own business." Pain spread through the last words Layla spat. Pressing a hand to her right breast, she toppled forward in the driver's seat. She'd taken a hit in the chest from a hunk of shrapnel that had punched through the battle car's floorboards. Walking over swiftly, Dee lifted Layla with ease and set her down in the shade of a nearby tree. Throwing a quick glance at the sky and the shelter, Dee listened in the direction from which Layla had come. "They're not coming," the palm of his left hand could be heard to say. "Her people are still a long way off. What are you planning on doing?" "Can't leave her like this." "You can play nursemaid to the mortally wounded later. Our target's in that steel box right now. Completely immobilized. I say finish him off as soon as possible, and deliver the girl. After all, if she's been bitten already, if we slay the noble, she'll be back to normal. That should please her to no end." Shrouded as always in an eerie aura, Dee's beautiful visage clouded for an instant. She'd be pleased. Because she was human again. Or because he was... "Don't start harping on that again. Has this fine spring day knocked a few of your screws loose? We're so close. And if you just go do it now, you could kill him without working up a sweat. The sun'll be setting soon, you know. I say let the competition rot." As if to corroborate the voice's growing impatience, the sky began to dawn a darker shade of blue. At this time of year, sunset came around 5 night, which gave Dee fewer than 2 hours to finish his work. Despite that, Dee pulled open the front of Layla's coverall without a word. Evident even through her clothing, the pale fullness of her bosom was now laid bare. The flesh above her left breast burst outwards in a number of spots. Already the bloodied wounds had swollen black and blue. They were like so many eerie sarcomata growing from her white skin. Dee stood up, lifted the emergency kit from his saddlebags, and returned. When he opened the lid of the kit, agitation surged into his eyes. The voice cackled mockingly. "I was just trying to remember when you bought that set. You've been hauling it around all this time and never used it once. Well, the stuff inside became useless a long, long time ago. That's the trouble with people who can't die." "Too true," Dee muttered in his usual monotone. Doing a check of Layla's battle car and pulling out a first aid kit. Just to be safe, he set it on the floorboards to open it, then closed it again quickly. "What is it?" "There's nothing in there. She's pretty much out of everything." "So, didn't restock it, eh? Never heard of such a cavalier hunter." Wounds, you could say, were an occupational hazard for hunters, and replacing medical supplies was every bit as important as in procuring weapons. On arriving in a town or village, It was second nature for a hunter to race to the arms merchant and pharmacy first, and then hit the general store or saloon later. But Layla had no medical supplies, and yet she was the youngest sister of the Marcus clan, whose 5 members ranked up there with a handful of veteran hunters. Once again, Dee squatted by the girl's side. Her breathing was rather shallow, though it seemed the fragments within her hadn't damaged any internal organs. There was some danger of toxins from the shrapnel causing tetanus if the chunks of metal were left where they were. In fact, the entry and exit wounds were already swelling a deep, dirty red. "What are you gonna do? You know I only work on you. Can't do a thing for humans." "I know. There's no choice but to deal with humans the human way." From the combat belt on his waist, Dee drew a caltrop. He brought one of the points to his left hand. "What do you think you're doing?" "If the girl dies, you and I are through." "Shit. Are you threatening me?" But before the voice had finished speaking, pale blue flames enveloped the tip of the caltrop. The sharp point heated quickly and turned crimson. Dee brought his left hand closer to Layla's brow. Her sizable eyes opened. "What are you doing?" she asked, cauterizing the wound. "I'll do it so it doesn't hurt." "How kind of you," she shot back sarcastically. "Don't expect me to thank you." "Don't talk." Layla jerked her face away from the approaching hand. "I don't know what kind of hocus pocus you can pull, but I'll be damned if I'm going to let you play around with my body while I'm out. I'm going to be awake to see this from start to finish. Try anything funny, and believe me, you'll pay." Undeterred, Dee set his left hand on her. "Don't." Layla's words became a scream. "Stop. I'm begging you. Do it while I'm still awake, please," she pleaded. Something glistening welled in her eyes as they gazed at Dee. It spoke of horrific memories. Silently taking his hand away, Dee tore the sleeve of his coat and put a strip of cloth from it between Layla's lips. They had no anesthesia. The cloth was to keep her from biting her tongue. This time she cooperated quietly. The little nod she made must have been an expression of gratitude. Dee lowered the hot metal to her skin. Shortly thereafter, a pungent scent and a series of low moans began to permeate the darkening bower. Page break indicated by a small cross. Dusk seemed to coalesce around him. He opened his eyes. Nothing could replace this feeling, that the spell that imprisoned him to the very last cell was drawing away like the tide. This was his favorite time. His eyes hastened to his side. Not far from him, a girl sat quietly on the edge of the bed. She gave the impression of not having moved a muscle since she'd sat down. Her pretty white blossom of a face turned to him. "What's wrong?" he asked, still lying flat on a bed littered with silk cushions. He'd glimpsed the trail of a teardrop on the girl's cheek. "There's someone outside." "Oh. Here already." In the recesses of his tense voice lay unshakable self-confidence. No matter how skilled the vampire hunter, nothing could match a noble rising in the darkness. Stepping down lightly onto the steel floor, he glanced at the door and his eyes fairly shot out. was that a thread-like silver line falling across the floor. Realizing that it was moonlight sneaking in through a crack carved above the door, he turned back to the girl. "During the day, someone opened it with a sword," she said. "Hunters hired by father, no doubt." Discerning a certain something on the blue dress that covered her down to the knees, he knit his brow. It was an elegant silver dirk. He'd been wearing it at his waist. What had she intended to use it for? For a brief while he focused on the weapon. Then he made his way over to the video monitors on the wall to check on the situation outside. Page break indicated by a small cross. By the time Dee had burned and carved away each wound, and had sterilized the damaged skin with a freshly heated caltrop, Layla finally passed out. "For the most part, her worries are over," the voice said. "But bacteria have already set up shop in her body. She'll be getting hit by some pretty intense chills soon. If she can get past that, she'll be able to rest easy. You've gone this far. Might as well do the next step. Keep treating her through the home stretch." With no sign of listening to the somewhat disgusted voice, Dee kept looking back and forth between the shelter and the sky of ever-deepening blue. When the caltrop stuck in the ground had cooled, he returned it to his belt and stood up, saying, "He should be coming out any minute now." "You're so cold," the voice said with resentment. "You mean to tell me when he does, you'll just stop treating her? Don't run off like some back-alley quack." But then the voice stopped unexpectedly. Dee took a step forward. Like stagnated blue light, the door to the shelter retracted without a sound. Looking back, he saw Layla. The eyes that swiftly turned forward again held a lurid light. There he stood, the greatest vampire hunter of all. The hem of his coat fluttering in the night breeze, Dee came down the hill. It wasn't long before the 6 obsidian horses appeared one after another, followed, of course, by the black lacquered carriage. Machinery within the shelter had successfully completed the necessary repairs to it during the day. A young man clad in black peered silently down at Dee from the coachman's perch. "Out of our way," he said. His voice was strangely soft. "Scum though you are for the way you place a price on people's lives, I still have no wish to engage in a pointless and lethal exchange." An odd hue of emotion flowed into Dee's eyes, then swiftly vanished. "I'll take the girl," Dee said perfunctorily, his demeanor free from violence or exuberance. The man's eyes were gradually being dyed red. "I took her because I want her," he said. "You should try to do the same. If you're up to battling a noble at night, that is." The darkness solidified. Though both the color and light remained the same there, the space between the two of them seemed to have suddenly froze. The crack of whipped flesh broke the stillness. Without even a whinny, 24 hooves began beating the earth. Whether their intent was to trample the insignificant hunter or to make him get out of the way, those 6 madly charging horses unexpectedly came to a dead stop a few yards shy of Dee. There was a startled cry of "Merling!" The instant Dee realized the voice flew from a woman inside the carriage. His body soared into the air like a mystic bird. Still distracted by her plaintive cry, There was a split-second delay before Dee brought his silvery flash down at the youth's head. Sparks spilled into the darkness like scattered jewels, trailing a beautiful metallic ching behind them. The youth, Merlin, had stopped Dee's deadly stroke with the back of his left hand. That part of his hand was bound in steel armor. Twisting his body out of the way of the 3 flashes of light roaring through the air toward his chest, Dee came silently back down to earth on the opposite side of the vehicle. From the roof of the carriage down to Dee, the miasma flowed, and from Dee back up to the roof. At this intense exchange of unearthly auras, the horses whinnied, and the carriage rocked wildly. Long claws grew from the fingers of the noble's right hand. But no, they were not simply nails. Glittering blackly, they clearly had the lustrous sheen of steel. When danger was near, the vampires' normal fingernails became murderous steel implements. Such a fine face and skill. I've heard your name before. The name that can make any noble grow pale. So you're Dee, Merlin said, his voice a blend of admiration and fear. I've heard of you too. Dee responded softly. I've heard there was a young lord praised for his virtue by his subjects. Perhaps the only one among all the nobility. His name was Merlin, I'm quite certain. I always wanted to meet you, one way or another. Well, now you have. The hunter replied, I'm right here. Will you not let us go? I've done nothing to the humans. Tell that to the father you made like yourself before you carried off his daughter. Distress filled Merlin's countenance. The tension abruptly drained from Dee's body. With a shout of "Yah!" from Merlin, the horses pummeled the earth. Speeding by Dee's side, they started to gallop up the earthen slope. Dee raced like the wind. The carriage was every bit a match for Dee's speed. At the summit of the hill, Dee came alongside the carriage. His right hand reached for the door handle, and then the golden handle just started pulling away. As he watched, the carriage dwindled in size, and Dee turned himself around and headed over to a stand of trees. That was where Layla lay. Heard a strange voice, didn't you? The usual strange voice said. Kinda makes you think being hard of hearing might not be so bad. We might be wrapping up this job right about now otherwise. Dee squatted down and put a hand to Layla's brow. She was as hot as fire. Her sweat-drenched face was twisted with pain. Both fever and pain were due to her infection. Relentless chills would soon follow. Without a moment's hesitation, Dee stripped off Layla's clothes. When her beautiful naked body was stretched out on the green grass, a surprised "Wow!" came from his left hand. By the looks of it, I'd say this little girl's had a pretty hard life. From her round, firm breasts down to her thighs, and across her whole back, Layla's skin was covered with the scars of numerous gashes and the stitches that had closed them. This was a girl who lived in the carnage that was the frontier. Without seeming to be harboring any strong emotion, Dee covered Layla with himself. Crying out a little, Layla clung to his powerful chest. Her fever-swollen lips trembled, letting a mumbled word escape over and over again. A single word, but it was what had stayed Dee's hand at the carriage door. Page break indicated by a small cross. When Karl Marcus's mount crested the hill an hour later, there was no sign of anyone or anything in the vicinity, aside from his sister, who was wrapped in a blanket and resting peacefully in her seat in the battle car. Another 30 minutes after that, the bus driven by Borgoff appeared, along with Nolt, who was riding point. Kyle carried Layla into the vehicle in a great hurry. They must have been very close, because his expression had changed markedly. She's gonna be okay, won't she, bro? He stammered. Give her something. I don't care what. As Borgoff watched him struggle on the brink of tears, he wore a rancorous expression, but he took Layla's pulse nonetheless, checked her fever, and before long gave a satisfied nod. She's all right. I'll check out her internal organs and circulation with a CAT scan anyway. But there's no need to worry. Staring down at Kyle, where he'd slumped to the floor in apparent relief, he added, This kind of shit is what happens when you go behind my back and send Layla out alone. I know. You can take the strap to me later for all I care. But which one of them you figure rough Layla up so bad? Kyle's face had reclaimed its original viciousness. Eyes staring firmly into space. He was so angry he didn't notice the froth running from the corners of his mouth. His body shook. Well, probably not the one who treated her. Which means maybe it was neither of them. You wouldn't think anyone as soft as all that could survive this long out here on the frontier. It don't matter, Kyle said, almost ranting deliriously. It don't matter which of them did it. I'll find them both and cut them to pieces, take their arms and legs off and put them back on where they don't belong, stuff their mouths with their own steaming guts, knock yourself out, his older brother said. Anyway, you're sure there wasn't anyone around, Layla? From the look of her wound, she got them 3, maybe 4 hours ago. The door opened and Nolt stuck his head in. We've got some tracks from a carriage passing this way, still fresh. Maybe from an hour before we got here, tops. There's something else, too. Some prints from horseshoes. If that's the case, then the 2 of them must have got out of here, too. And it looks like it didn't get settled. Nodding gravely at his own words, Borgoff ordered Nolt to take care of Layla and Grovek. He went to his room in the back, returning to the driver's seat clutching a cloth-wrapped package of apparent significance. If I've seen Dee's face, I can spot him, he muttered, pulling from the cloth a silver disc about 1.5 feet in diameter. Setting it up on a little stand almost in the center of the dashboard, Borgoff turned his heavily whiskered face to gaze out the window and up at the moon rising in the heavens. The moon was round and nearly full, but, thanks to the clouds obscuring part of it, it looked like it would have been nibbled here and there by bugs. When he set his huge form down, the driver's seat creaked and groaned. Then Borgoff crossed his hands in front of his chest and began to stare fixedly at the propped-up silver platter with eyes that looked like they could bore right through it. A minute passed, then 2. Kyle wouldn't leave Layla's side as she lay in bed. As Nolt peered in through the door next to the driver's seat, sweat beaded his face just as profusely as Borgoff's. And then, as the silvery surface of the platter grew smoky, almost like clouds covered it, and the figure of a young man in black astride a horse suddenly formed on its surface. It was Dee. Turning their way and saying something, he pulled on the reins in his hands and disappeared into a thicket. It was a replay of Dee from the previous night, talking with them after the battle with the vampiric villagers. If people or things looked a little different, it was probably because these images were taken from Borgoff's memories. Here was a man who could project his own memories onto a silver platter. Yet, despite this admirable display of what some would call sorcery, Borgoff glared mercilessly at the moon in the sky with bloodshot eyes. No, not at the moon, but at a big mass of clouds under it. The moonlight shining on the clouds edged them in blue. There was no change in either the moon or the cloud mass, or so it appeared for an instant. Then, even though the moon remained unchanged, the heart of the cloud mass seemed to begin to glow ever so faintly. In the space of a breath, a figure shaped like a man started wriggling there, and, with a second breath, it became a clear picture. Someone was riding a horse down a pitch-black road. Based on his past memory of Dee, Borgoff was using the silver platter and moon as projectors to make the present Dee appear in the cloud mass. The receding figure that seemed to be looking down on them from the distant heavens was a remarkable likeness of Dee, as he raced down the road a few score miles ahead. First part, end.